All right. To see, there we go. There, this shows up on my screen. We've been talking about parasitic arthropods and have talked about mites and crustaceans, and we've started on insects. And in the hexapoda, that's insects plus things like springtails, which are technically not insects as such. We've covered the lice. We covered flies and fleas last time. The Strepsiptera are downright disturbing, and we'll get to those on Wednesday. The Hymenoptera includes wasps, bees, and ants, and it is a very large group. There's something like 150,000 known species of Hymenopteran. Quite possibly the true number is many times that. And the Hymenoptera includes a large number of families that are parasitoids. You might recall that parasitoids differ from parasites because they always kill the host. Parasites can kill the host, but that's not the goal of the life cycle. In fact, with many parasites, if they, sorry, I've got a cat walking on the keys. Excuse me. Fern, would you please not walk on the keys? Hang on, let me try to get this started again. I can't see anything on screen. What the heck did you do? Okay. Sorry, waiting for it to come back up. I'm just going to hope everybody can see that. Where was I? Lots of Hymenopterans. Very diverse group of parasitoids. Parasites may kill the host, but that's not the goal. And in fact, it may not be adaptive if a parasite kills its host. It's to the parasite's advantage if the host lives, because that may mean the parasite can spread more of its offspring around. Parasitoids can be thought of as particularly inventive and nasty predators because their life cycle requires the ultimate death of the host. So you can tell Hymenoptera because they've got wings that are membranous. In some species, the wings may only be found in certain members and may be temporary, like ants. Ants don't have wings except for males and females that may be leaving the colony and flying to start a new one. The hind wing and the forewing are connected by hooks. The mouth parts are well developed, and there's a tube-like extension from the abdomen. It actually consists of very highly modified appendages. It's called the ovipositor. That's for laying eggs. And in many, not all, parts of the ovipositor may be highly modified to form a sting. So in stinging Hymenoptera, the eggs actually come out kind of at the base of the sting, and the rest of the sting is modified ovipositor that's used, of course, for injecting venom. The earliest branches off the tree are the so-called wood wasps or sawflies. They've got a long ovipositor that's actually saw-shaped, and they will use it to cut plant tissues and lay their eggs inside. The larvae actually look like little caterpillars. There's some differences, but they look kind of like that, and feed on their host plants. That's the earliest branches. The parasitoid lifestyle evolved exactly once, back fairly close to the origin of Hymenoptera in a time period we call the Permian. So that puts it at roughly 280, 270 million years ago would be when this happened. But the weird thing is that the common ancestor of all parasitoids gave rise to all of the parasitoids today in the Hymenoptera, but also a lot of non-parasitic taxa that gave up being parasitoids and evolved different lifestyles.
I just wanted to go straight.
Okay, my wife says, yeah, they just wanted to go straight. They're giving up the life of crime and becoming fine, upstanding citizens. I love you, sweetie. The closest relatives of bees, for example, that includes honeybees, but there's something on the order of 20,000 species of bees, many of them solitary. If anybody knows our former grad student, Coleman Little, he did a great master's project on wild bees. Many more species than just the honeybees and carpenter bees you might know. Anyway, their closest relatives are parasitoid wasps that prey on aphids in a family called the Philanthinae. I would not expect you to see all of the details. This is the latest molecular phylogeny of the Hymenoptera that I could find. Don't worry if you can't read all of the names at this scale. We'll zoom in on this a bit. But up at the top, those are the deepest branches of the tree. And all of those branches up at the top that are not in that shaded box, okay, many of the branches up at the top of the tree, the first 6, they say Xyloidea, Pamphiloidea, Tenthredinioidea, etc. Those are the sawflies or the wood wasps. They don't have that wasp waist. They don't have that very narrow connection between the thorax and the abdomen. And they lay their eggs inside plant tissues. And they've got that saw-shaped ovipositor to help them cut into the plant tissues. If we zoom in a little bit, there is one of the nodes on the tree, one of that branch points, it's labeled with a black star, is the apocrita. That includes all of the wasp-waisted hymenopterans, the ones with this very narrow connection between the thorax and the abdomen. And the common ancestor of all apocretans was a parasitoid. So was the common ancestor of the apocretans and the most closely related sawfly family to it, the Orosiidea, which is up at the very top and probably cut off. But yeah, all of those families that you see up at the top there, they're all parasitoids of one stripe or another. And then if we zoom in a little bit more, within that apocrita, a clade called the aculeata includes all of the hymenopterans that can sting. That includes, you can see it maybe a quarter of the way down. There's a family called the Vespidae. That's the familiar stinging wasps. That's your hornets and yellow jackets and all of the things that make summer in Arkansas such an adventure. The ants are labeled, they're the Formicidae. You can see it says ants about midway down. And then a subclade labeled Anthophila includes all of the bees. Honeybees are about midway through the Anthophila in a clade called the Apidae. But there's lots of other bee varieties, whole families of what we call bees that are down there at the base of the tree. And then everything that you don't recognize is going to be parasitic wasps of one sort or another. Just about all of the other names that aren't ants or vespid wasps or bees are parasitoids. So they're all over the map. And we can talk about different strategies that parasitoid insects will use. Endoparasites directly inject their eggs into a host, and ectoparasites will lay their eggs on the outside. That much we know, but there's 2 more terms. A koinobiont. Koino means in common. Don't know how many of you are biblical scholars, but koine is the name for the dialect of Greek that they wrote the New Testament in, and it means the common speech. It means, living in common. And koinobiont parasitoids lay their eggs in a host and leave it alive. And the host can feed, the host can evade predators if it has to, and the host may even grow all the time, the parasitoid larvae are inside it, eating it from the inside out. These are the ones that I mentioned inspired the movie Alien. And then idiobionts, the larvae feed, the host is still living, but it's paralyzed. The host can't move, the host doesn't do anything, but just sit there and get devoured from the inside out. There may be some exceptions. I couldn't find any, but most endoparasites are also koinobionts. They'll lay their eggs in a living host, inside a living host, and the host gets eaten while it's living. And then most parasitoids are also idiobionts. They'll lay an egg on a paralyzed host and let that hatch into a larva that burrows in and feeds. I actually got this picture from the New York Post. This was taken in Australia. That's a wasp dragging off a huntsman spider that's larger than itself. This freaked out everybody, especially because Australia is kind of known for having scary wildlife that tries to kill you. But we actually have wasps around here that do this. They're pretty widespread. These are wasps in the family Pompilidae. The females sting and paralyze spiders. If they get a burrowing spider, they might leave it where it is, but in many cases, they will excavate a burrow beforehand and drag the spider to the burrow, stuff it down in the burrow, and lay a single egg on top of each spider. The spider is still alive. You don't want the spider decaying on you. Well, not want, but I mean, that's not adaptive. So the spider is kept alive, and the larva hatches, burrows in. Somehow it knows to eat the non-vital structures first and leave the heart and the nervous system for last. And once that's done, it pupates, hatches, and flies off to mate, and round goes the circle of life. I have occasionally seen some of our own native pompilids. They look like this. They're quite attractive insects, and they're quite large. Females can get over 50 millimeters. We're talking nearly 2 inches in length. The males are a bit smaller. The common name for these is tarantula hawks. And our local species have these very distinctive metallic blue bodies. The wings may either be kind of rust-colored or black. This particular one, Pepsis grossa, is actually the state insect of New Mexico, but we get it here as well. Arkansas is neat because we're kind of the easternmost edge for a lot of Western species. So Arkansas has native horned lizards and prickly pear cactus and roadrunners and tarantula hawks. In fact, roadrunners are one of the few things that will eat tarantula hawks. That sting is among the most painful. You may well have seen this guy who's actually gone out, let himself get stung by a huge number of Hymenopteran species and ranked how painful each one is. And this one is definitely a 4 on the scale. Compared it to dropping your hairdryer in the bathtub. It's got this electric shock quality to it when it stings. Yeah, they don't go out of their way to attack people, but still, don't mess with a spider wasp. Hey, Fern. Sorry, the cat's dancing on my keyboard again. Move, you awful cat. Get your butt out of my... Yeah, get up there. Get up there. Okay. Here. Okay. Here's an example of an endoparasitic koinobiont. This is a hawk moth, genus Manduca. Rather attractive moths, but they've got caterpillars that feed on plants in the plant family Solanaceae, aka the nightshade family. That includes tobacco. It also includes potatoes, tomatoes, peppers, and eggplants. And the caterpillars are known as hornworms. And in the bottom picture, you can see a tomato hornworm, beautifully camouflaged and remarkably hard to spot, hanging onto a tomato stem. If you look on the right, you can see there's a little spike growing out of its behind. That's why it's called a hornworm. I'm not sure what that spike does. It looks like it could be a sting, but it's actually harmless. These things can't hurt you, but they are remarkably good at removing every last bit of foliage on your tomato plants. Nice kitty. All right, I don't know if you can see this. I'm trying to give this lecture while petting a needy cat at the same time. And this is what wasps in the family Braconidae do to it. This is Catesia congregata's work. The adult wasps, which are just a couple millimeters in size, will lay their eggs inside the eggs of the hawk moth. The larvae hatch inside the caterpillar, and they'll start eating it from the inside. Somehow they know to save the critical organs for last. And once they're mature, by this time the caterpillar is pretty much a shriveled husk, and it's definitely never going to become a moth. They form these pupae on the outside of the caterpillar. When I was a kid, my mom used to grow a lot of tomatoes, and I can remember seeing one of these parasitized caterpillars one day, walking around looking like it had been stabbed with a handful of Q-tips. Nice kitty. There's lots of other species in this genus. A lot of them attack pests, cabbage loopers, cutworms, army worms. Catesia melanoschellus attacks gypsy moth. I don't think we get those down here, but that's a serious pest of trees in the Northeast United States. And Catesia melanoschellus was introduced deliberately in 1912 as part of efforts to control gypsy moths. So there you can see a cocoon on the left, and that's what an adult looks like on the right. This is where things get weird. Catesia melanoschellus and other wasps in the family Braconidae have this relationship with viruses. In the virus genus Brachyvirus, when Catesia lays its eggs, it also introduces Brachyvirus, and Brachyvirus prevents the host from molting, so it doesn't let them develop into adults. And it also suppresses the host immune system. So Catesia deliberately infects its host with a virus that keeps the host from rejecting the parasite. These are electron micrographs of wasp ovary cells. Whoops. And that's Catesia melanoschellus virus on the left, and then a different species on the right. And on the left, you see all those dark spots. Those are actual virus particles that are assembling inside specialized cells in the wasp ovary that make up a structure called the bract. It gets weirder. I don't know how much virology you folks have had, but you might have learned this at some point. There are viruses where the virus's DNA can splice itself into the host DNA and be transcribed, translated, and passed on for many generations. In bacteriophage, these viruses that attack bacteria, the bacteriophage DNA can just splice itself into the bacterial DNA and be passed on for many generations in what's called the lysogenic phase. And then all of a sudden, it can start being transcribed, translated, replicated, make a whole bunch of new viruses, and burst out of the bacteria in what's called the lytic phase of the cycle. Eukaryotic viruses can do this too, and the virus's genome is actually dispersed among the wasp's own genes. In that state, it's called a provirus. And here's where it gets weird. The viruses can't replicate The only cells where the viruses are actually assembled are those specialized cells in the wasp ovaries. That's the only place where you get actual virions assembling. The wasp injects those viruses into the host. The viruses don't actually infect the host. The viruses don't penetrate host cells and start duplicating themselves to make new viruses. The viruses do, I'm not entirely sure how, affect the host's ability to phagocytose. The host equivalent of white blood cells would normally engulf the wasp's egg and kill it, but the virus blocks them from doing so. The virus has a bunch of genes for virulence factors, even though the virus can't replicate inside the host. So do we actually have a symbiont, or are we at the stage now where instead of a virus, we've got viral genes spliced into wasp DNA, and the wasp uses them to create this defense that can no longer be called a virus? What the heck have we got here? It's really, truly weird. There are some wasps, by the way, that this has happened to, but they don't inject virus. They inject virus proteins. What they'll do when they lay their eggs is inject these protein particles that are viral protein, but the protein particles don't contain any DNA. They're somehow able to short circuit the host immune system on their own without being true viruses anymore. So that's a case where the symbiont has gotten so integrated into the host that, you know, it's almost not like it's a symbiont anymore. So that's really weird. There's other parasitoids that are related. You're looking at trichogramma down there on the bottom, noted for being very small. These things are less than a millimeter. They are among the smallest animals. The nervous system has been stripped down to about 10,000 neurons. That's thought to be the minimum for, you know, operating a complex body. And trichogramma lays its egg eggs inside moth eggs, and they've actually been used for biological control since the early 20th century. And in fact, you can buy them. You could order these things. I don't know if it's the season to do it now, but in principle, you could buy these things off of Amazon. And yeah, they'll take out, you know, cabbage loopers. They'll take out all kinds of plant-chewing moths. If you don't want to buy your own parasitoids, by the way, never let it be said that I don't give practical advice. You can encourage wild parasitoid populations because the adults feed on nectar. They'll feed on nectar for a while before laying their eggs in host insect eggs. So if you grow small flowered plants next to your tomatoes, like dill is a good one, fennel, mint, if it's a variety of mint that flowers, yarrow is very nice. Those will encourage the growth of wild parasitoid populations. Or you can encourage the growth of wild plants nearby. Goldenrod is a good one. Obviously, you shouldn't spray everything with pesticides because that will kill off the beneficial parasitoids as well as the harmful insects. So there, never let it be said I don't tell you something practical. Those of you with gardens might try that next spring. Some more tricks that they get up to. There's yet another parasitoid wasp, Copidosoma floridanum, caught in the act of laying its egg inside an embryo of a cabbage-feeding moth, or lettuce, I think. Yeah, this thing feeds on lettuce. It's called Trichoplusia ni, which makes me think it was named by Monty Python. If you know the Monty Python and the Holy Grail, they encounter the knights who say ni. So this is Trichoplusia ni that is getting parasitized. Right. Dave DeSword knows more about Trichoplusia than I do. He used to do a lot of research on it. But Copidosoma parasitizes it, and a single egg of Copidosoma floridanum can produce over 3,000 larvae. It's like identical twins, but a hell of a lot more of them. That's called polyembryony. If you've hung out with Dr. Padberg, you might know that armadillos do this naturally. Every fertilized egg divides into 4, and armadillos are born as 4 identical quadruplets. And of course, occasionally we have identical twins, but in the case of Copidosoma, we've got over 3,000 genetically identical twins. But each egg produces 2 different types of larvae, even though all of the larvae from one egg are clones of each other. Down below, that's a reproductive larva, that thing that looks kind of like a bag. That will develop into an adult. That will feed on the caterpillar of the Trichoplusia and eventually hatch into an adult. But some of those larvae become precocious larvae. There's one at the top. They'll never develop into an adults. They're dead. Well, they're not dead, but they will die inside their host. They never get out. But it's hard to see in this picture, but the head is over on the right, and there's huge jaws on those heads. And the precocious larvae will hunt down and kill other parasitoid larvae. So if an embryo gets attacked by 2 Copidosoma who both lay their eggs in the same, they both lay their eggs in the same host egg, then both of those eggs will produce both reproductive larvae and precocious larvae, and the precocious larvae of each will try to kill the larvae of the other. So the precocious larvae are fighting each other, each one trying to free up resources for the reproductive larvae that they are twins to. And there's a picture of it happening. On the right, that's a precocious larva. It's attacking reproductive larvae that have been stained fluorescent green. And you can see the bright fluorescent green in the precocious larva's gut. So the precocious larva is taking bites out of reproductive larvae from an unrelated wasp. And in my evolution class, we talk a bit about altruism, organisms giving up a benefit to enable another organism to survive and reproduce. And one of the ways that you can explain that through evolution is if you have genes that encourage you in any way to help your kin, those genes will become more common and they'll get passed on because your kin also have those genes because they're your kin. Definition of kin is the individuals you share genes with. This is why a fellow named J.B.S. Haldane was asked if he would lay down his life for his brother, and he said, no, but I'd do it for 2 brothers or maybe 8 first cousins. The idea is that 2 brothers, if he can save 2 of his brothers, he's passed on as many more genes than he would by having a child of his own. I guess it's not that funny. But I talk more about this in Biology 4415. And it works in this case because those precocious larvae, since they're clones, they're genetically identical to the reproductive larvae. The precocious larvae don't reproduce. They will die inside the host, but they will pass on as many of their genes as they would if they could reproduce because they save the lives of their identical twins. So this actually works as a neat case of evolutionary altruism. You have cases of parasitoids affecting host behavior. There are some where the caterpillar will end up defending the pupae of the parasitoids that are killing it. This is a really cool one. This is a cynipid. Cynipid wasps are typically parasites of oaks. If you've ever looked at a lot of oak leaves and seen lumps or swellings or sometimes these ping pong ball sized growths growing on oak leaves, that's probably galls caused by various cynipids. This particular cynipid, Basedia, lays its eggs in the tissues of live oaks, and the plant tissues grow into little hollows called crypts. And there you've got a couple of pupae developing inside a couple of crypts inside the tissues of a live oak. Basedia gets parasitized by the parasitoid recently named called Euderus Set, named after Set, the Egyptian god of evil and chaos. And if they're parasitized by Euderus Set, the Basedia larvae will chew a hole in their own crypt, stick their heads into the hole to plug it up, and then die. Why do they do that? That enables the Euderus larvae to chew a hole right through the Basedia larvae's head and get out. So that is an extremely sinister case of parasitoids manipulating host behavior. Making these larvae open their own crypts, plug them with their own heads, and die so that the parasitoid can burst out of their dead heads. Yeah, if this sort of thing happened to people, it would be the most horrifying horror movie of all time. Yet for all the amazing tricks of parasitoid wasps, they do have a weakness because they can get infected by hyperparasitoids. So there is a hyperparasitoid wasp, Hypoptera malus tabacum, caught laying its eggs in the pupae of Cotesia congregatum, which is the one that we started this whole thing with, that lays its eggs in tomato hornworm. I'm not sure if there are hyperparasitoids, although nothing would surprise me anymore. I'm not really sure how far this goes. But it reminds me of some wag wrote a poem that goes, big fleas have littler fleas upon their backs to bite them, and littler fleas have littler fleas, and so on, ad infinitum. I'm not sure how far down that goes, but yeah, here we have a parasitoid of a parasitoid. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and stop there. Sorry, I'm waiting for the screen to come back, but I will now stop. Come on, spinning ball. There we are. And I will stop recording.